Hi, thank you so much for joining me in the Louie file today. Today, seeing as how this recording is done just after the 4th of July celebration, so I thought I would take a few moments to talk about freedom, not just freedom for the United States, excuse me, but the freedom that we have as a Christian in Christ. And what does that really mean, and how do we obtain that? Today I'm going to be reading a few verses in the Gospel of John, chapter 8. It's verse 31 and 32. And then we'll see where we go from there. So, John 8:31, it says, "So Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed him, 'If you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free.'" That's so good. All right, so let's break this down a little bit. Let's look at what's really being said here. So Jesus is saying this at first in verse 31 to those Jews who had believed him. So there is some sense of them being on board with who he is and what he's about. So this right away tells me that simply believing in Jesus, in the way that we tend to say that a lot of times, isn't really enough to free us. Now, let me make this clear. When you are born again by receiving Christ, you're free, but you're not really knowledgeable of that freedom, and you're not really walking in it most of the time. Most of the time, that coming to know the truth takes a while. You know, in Romans chapter 12, the Apostle Paul said that he said, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might know what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." So there's an aspect of this that when you believe Jesus, that's enough. But then there's another aspect where it's really not enough, and hopefully that'll clear up as we go. So he's saying this to those that believed. He says, "If you continue in my word." So what is he saying? He's saying you don't just receive his word one time, you receive him one time, I believe, and then that's it. You continue in his word. It becomes your life. It becomes a part of who you are, and you remain in it. In John 15, he used the word abide. He says, "I'm the vine, you're the branches. If you abide in me, and me in you, then you will bear fruit." There'll be some kind of result from this continuing, this abiding in. Then he says, "Then those that believe and continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine." So the word disciple at its basic definition is learner. So you believe, you continue in his word, and then Jesus says that when you're doing that, when you're believing and continuing in my word, then you're really a learner. You're really the follower. You're really my follower then. And then he says, and you will know the truth. So the truth only comes about by believing, continuing in his word, being a learner. So then you will know the truth. See, when you just believe Jesus on the onset, on the front end, you know the truth in the sense of knowing who Jesus is, but you don't know, you're not intimate with the truth yet. That comes with continuing. And then he says, and the truth will make you free. So there's a path to this freedom, isn't there? There's believing, there's continuing in his word, that's being a learner, and then you come to know the truth, and then the truth makes you free. So the freedom that we're after in Christ isn't just like a one-time automatic event in a sense. We have to come to know it. We have to have renewed minds. We have to learn what it means to walk one with him, knowing him, continuing in him. So then the next question is, the truth makes us free. Well, what does the truth make us free from? Now, if you keep reading, what happens is the Jews here kind of argue and fight back with Jesus, and they say, "We're Abraham's descendants, and we've never been enslaved to anyone. How is it you say you'll become free?" Well, Jesus tells them, everyone who commits sin is a slave of sin. So they're thinking, we're free, and he's saying, no, You're still in bondage. You don't even know it, but you're in bondage. Why don't they know it? Because they haven't been around continuing in His Word. It's self-evident. It makes itself clear. Well, he goes on having this back and forth with this group, and he goes on in John 8, verse 43. Let's jump to 43. Why do you not understand what I'm saying? He says, it is because you cannot hear my word. You are of your father the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. Uh-oh. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he's a liar and the father of lies. But because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Oh my gosh. See, they're in bondage and don't even know it. They are enslaved to Satan, the devil. Right here, Jesus clearly portrays this. And that is not just them, it's us prior to coming to believe in Him and getting into His Word and becoming a disciple and coming to discover and know the truth. And that freedom only comes through that process of coming to know Him who is truth. Jesus says, you have no room for my word. And when I speak truth, you reject it. You know, when we've lived our whole lives believing and living under the lie, the truth sounds foreign to us. You know, in John 10, Jesus says that He's the shepherd, the good shepherd, and His sheep hear His voice, and they will not follow the voice of a stranger. So we have a stranger's voice here. As a believer, Satan's voice is now a strange voice. As a lost person, he was our father, and that's all we knew. We were in bondage to him and didn't even know it. You know, the world offers us pot and sex and power and pride and money and all of these kind of things. Stuff, things, reputation. It offers us all of these things as freedom. You know, I used to live like that. I used to smoke pot and eat pills and drink and run wild, and I used to think I'm free. I can just do whatever I want to do. Freedom means that I can just do whatever I want to do. Well, that's not true. Freedom brings with it responsibility. If you do not become responsible, you will end up back in bondage. Just go ask anyone that's in jail or prison. Just ask them. They were not responsible. They behaved irresponsibly, and it put them back into literal physical bondage in jail and or prison. But what we're talking about here is spiritual bondage, and it works the same way. We have to, now, once we come to know who Christ is, He reveals the truth to us, and we're made free. Well, we have to stay in that freedom. So that, if you jump over with me to Galatians 5, verse 1, it tells us, it was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery or bondage. Now, in this instance, Paul's trying to keep the Galatians from getting themselves tangled up under the law, but the idea is the same. Once you're freed from sin and freed from the bondage to Satan, stand in that freedom. Don't let anything or anyone drag you back into that bondage. Well, that takes continuing in the Word. That takes becoming a learner. That means your whole life is abiding in Christ. So, in Genesis 5, verse 13, he goes on to tell us, for you were called to freedom. You were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. When I saw this the other day, I was thinking, you know, God values and He thinks freedom is like the best thing in the world. He really does, because He knows that freedom is the ground from which all other things come. Because if we don't have freedom, we can't love. Right? I mean, you are free to dislike me. I'm free to dislike you. But I'm also free to love you, just like you're free to love me. I can't make you love me. No one can make someone love them. It has to be a free thing. It has to be given freely. So God is after bringing us back into freedom. He's about freeing us from the satanic bondage of sin, setting us free in Christ. And now, from a human perspective, that includes a lot of risk. It looks as though God is really taking a risk. He's saying, look, I'm going to set you free in my Son Jesus. And that means that we have the freedom to sin, and we have the freedom to live a fleshly life. But the Apostle Paul's telling us here that's not why we're called to the freedom. See, in Galatians 5:13, we're called to freedom to serve one another. We don't use that as an opportunity for the flesh. And see, in Romans 6, the end of chapter Romans 5 and the beginning of Romans 6, Paul says that where grace abounds, or where sin abounds, grace does that much more abound. And so in Romans 6, he opens up that chapter with the question, well, what shall we sin that grace may abound? And he goes, no, why would you do that? You have died to that. Why would you continue living in something you died to? So he's telling us that God's grace that brings us back this freedom is there to empower us and encourage us to serve one another, to love one another, not be fleshy, indulgent, selfish indulgence. All right, I want to show you one more thing that I think goes with this. Titus chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. Look what this says. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us to deny ungodliness and worldly desires and to live sensibly, righteously, and godly in the present age. So, it's the grace of God that instructs us and gives us what we need to deny worldliness and ungodliness. It's not law, it's not a system, it's a person of Christ himself that frees us to live godly lives and to say no to sin and yes to the Lord. That's how it works. But first and foremost, we have to be freed. We have to be freed from our old boss, the sin boss, the devil. According to John 8:44, Jesus says it's his lust you're doing. See, once we really get to see that it's really not us, when we're lost, we think getting high and chasing women and doing all of these things is really what freedom is. It always leads to bondage, because the reality is it wasn't really our own lust. We were being swept up in the lust of our father, Satan. He's a liar and a murderer. And that's what he does. And until we're free from that, we think that's our own idea. We think that's our own voice. See, he's been lying to us all along. He's been lying to us all along. And he's been telling us that our bondage is freedom, and we've believed him. So Jesus Christ came to set the captives free. And he does that first by you believing in him. Right? You have to believe in him, continue in his word, be his disciple, come to know the truth, and then the truth will make you free. And that's what I'm talking about. Freedom in Christ. I hope this has helped you today, and I hope that you would stand firm in the freedom with which he has brought you. And don't let anyone put you under bondage again. All right, thanks for watching. I will see you next time on the Louie File.